Hi there. I'm Will Bernholtz, the marketing lead with Energy Dialogues. And today we're going to have an interview with the Assistant Commissioner for Mineral Resources, New Mexico State Land Office, Greg Bloom, who is one of our top speakers at the Permian Energy Dialogues in Austin, September 15th and 16th. Greg, for those who aren't familiar with the New Mexico State Land Office, tell us, what does your role actually cover? And how much of New Mexico's oil and gas activity runs through your office?
Sure. Thanks, Will, and thanks for this opportunity. So, yes, I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Mineral Resources at the New Mexico State Land Office, and I oversee two divisions, the Oil, Gas, and Mineral Division and the Royalty Management Division. And these represent the beginning and the end of oil and gas on state trust lands in our state. In the middle, you have the Oil Conservation Division, the OCD, which oversees permits and operations and things of that nature. So a lot of oil and gas in New Mexico runs through the land office and runs through the two divisions I oversee. The land office holds, give or take, about 1/3 of the land in the New Mexico Permian Basin, and we typically earn $2.5 billion per year from oil and gas revenue. And this year, I think because of some tremendous lease sales we had, we'll end up at about $3 billion. And this money goes into our permanent fund, which we spend about 6% of that per year as part of the state budget, and that saves New Mexico's tax-paying families thousands of dollars per year in money they'd otherwise have to pay in taxes. So, looking at each division individually, oil, gas, and minerals is responsible for the monthly lease sale. It handles maintenance of leases and assignments and rental payments. It approves communitizations, units, commingling. We also have a mineral bureau as well, which in charge of, we do some kind of legacy coal stuff, potash, but a lot of sand and gravel leasing, caliche leasing, which is important to the oil and gas industry. And we also have a water bureau, which oversees easements for saltwater disposal wells and monitoring wells, which are important to the industry also. And then finally, on the royalty side, we have a compliance bureau, which processes the incoming monthly royalties, which have grown tremendously. My first time at the land office back in 2012, I think we were making $300 million a year. Now we're doing that, close to that in a month. So things have changed over time. We have a compliance bureau, which handles issues generally that can't be resolved during monthly processing. And then finally, there's an audit bureau. And what we do is on a 5-year rolling basis, the companies that produce 80% of our royalties are audited. And a traditional fly-in audit might last a week or two with months of preparation beforehand. And then we do desk audits of wells, as well of smaller companies and properties. If a company is leaving the state or there's a merger, we'll do an immediate audit. And if a company has significant environmental violations, we'll also do an audit. I found an almost 1-to-1 correlation between being sloppy on the environmental front and being sloppy on the financial front, unfortunately. I should mention we have an annual royalty industry day or industry days. It's a conference. People can fly into Santa Fe and participate or join via Zoom. We typically have 200 to 300 people per year. It's free. And we offer one-on-one training and Q&A with our leadership and individual employees with individual remitters and companies. So what we tell folks is there's no reason why companies can't file perfect returns. That would be my preference. We're not playing gotcha here. We're an open book. I mean, we'll tell you what we're looking for. My audit team goes out and they might come back and have found nothing. I'm fine with that. So we really try to set clear guidelines. Finally, I'll add, I'm one of 3 commissioners on the state's Oil Conservation Commission, which make oil and gas regulations for the state. And here's issues also between companies, disputes between companies or between companies and the OCD, for example.
One of the aspects of your role that you mentioned, with the caveat that I understand there are some processes in place. You mentioned or in motion right now, the Oil Conservation Commission. Something we talked about before today was that there is some deliberation on new rules covering bonding, financial assurances, and well transfers. Knowing that you can't say everything while this is in motion, but how are those rules shaping up? What can you tell us?
Sure. So I, the applicants were a group of environmental organizations in New Mexico that saw that there's a large bonding gap in our state. It's hundreds of millions of dollars, if not many billions of dollars. And for people that aren't familiar, what a bonding gap is, it's the difference between the money held in bonds and the cost that would fall on the public or government to clean up if the industry didn't plug and clean up its own wells. And so the rule in front of the OCC would encourage earlier plugging, I believe, and would help prevent the creation of new orphan wells. And it would do this in three main ways. It would increase bonding requirements to $150,000 per well for those wells at the highest risk of abandonment, including low producing wells and inactive wells. Low producing wells would be a new category in New Mexico as a result of these rules. It would also require operators with high risk portfolios, that is, those with more than 20% inactive wells in their portfolio, to post financial assurances of $150,000 per well for all wells that they have and operate in the state until that number falls back below 20%. This would reduce the risk of large portfolios of old wells being entirely left to the state to deal with, which unfortunately has happened in the past. And then lastly, kind of in general terms, this new rule would make stronger well transfer rules to prevent poorly funded operators or operators with unacceptable compliance histories from acquiring wells, via sales, mergers, et cetera, with other companies. So, generally, the oil and gas industry is plugging their own wells and they sell wells to other operators with good compliance records, but not all the time. And this new rule is an attempt to get at some of those questions. And as we see the rules shaping up at the OCC, and we should finish our deliberations within the next couple of months, I expect that we'll see a final set of rules that close the bonding gap to a better degree than it is now. It'll prevent waste and it'll better protect public health and the environment. And I should say that after we finished the evidentiary record and hearing, I think it was 3 weeks of testimony from about 5 or 6 different parties on this rule, both the environmental groups and industry and the Oil Conservation Division, all three of them got together and talked about some compromises, and that the high risk portfolio, the original trigger for that was 15%. That was raised to 20%. And there are some other things that we can discuss a little bit later as well.
That's great. It's very cool to hear about what's happening as it's still in motion, and we look forward to hearing, perhaps by September where things land. Another area I wanted to touch on that is under your remit, the New Mexico State Land Office is another set of rulemaking on financial assurances. How is that different from what we were just talking about, and how is that different from what the commission is doing?
Yeah, so a lot of the drivers were the same, Will. And we are doing the two rules simultaneously, which I don't think would have been anyone's preference, but that's where it ended up because we're separate organizations. The OCD reports to the governor. I report to the Commissioner of Public Lands, and these trains were just on their separate rail lines at that time. And I should note that while I understand and can speak to the current status of the land office's proposed rule, I haven't been engaged with the conversations with outside parties. I didn't want conflict between these two simultaneous rulemakings where I was having conversations outside the OCC on this. So, but in short, the land office's draft bonding rule would increase minimum financial assurance requirements for oil and gas leases and make other changes to the existing rule. So the OCC is really focused at the well level and the operator level, and what the land office deals with is leases. We might not even know who all the operators are on our leases at this point. We're trying to get our arms around that and part through this process. But the land office approach would include ensuring that adequate financial resources are in place to mitigate risks associated with potential damage to state trust lands, such as failure to unplug inactive wells, unremediated spills, removal of related infrastructure, things of that sort. And it would also establish an annual reporting framework to enable the agency to better understand the potential liabilities and risk on each lease, and even understanding for the first time who all the operators are on some of our leases, because lessees are not required currently or expected to report that to us. With respect to future financial assurance requirements, when I say financial assurances, I mean, typically we're talking about bonds, but people can also put up cash or letters of credit, things of that sort. So right now on state trust land, a company can get a $25,000 multi-lease, quote unquote, mega bond, which would cover all their leases at the land office. And some companies have hundreds of leases with us, and so they're literally bonding at like $250 per lease, which isn't sufficient. This new rule would set the new minimum at $150,000 per lease, and on average, I think there's about 3 wells per lease. You're talking about something like 50,000 per well on average. And the new rule would also provide heightened bonding requirements based on risk factors or risk categories, including the number of inactive wells on a lease, unremediated spills on a lease, number of extremely marginal wells, history of bond claims, and other compliance-related factors. So folks that have leases with a lot of inactive wells and messy spills and things like that are unresponsive would likely see their they would move to full bonding. We would ask, hey, what would it cost to clean up that whole lease, and then expect them to put up a bond for that full amount. If they can't do it, the lease expires or would come back to us. The total bond amount under this proposal, however, cannot exceed the estimated plugging, remediation, and reclamation costs. The new rule also allows for deferral of the heightened bond requirement if a lessee can demonstrate that the conditions triggering those requirements are being diligently addressed, in a way that's acceptable to the land office. And we've had discussions with both environmental organizations and with industry on this, and we agreed to put a cap of $40 million in total bonds, which would be important for some of the bigger companies. And what else? And then I think something new would be, and this is actually part of our existing lease language, is that we will require annual lease reporting of things such as lease infrastructure, status of operations, that is things like inactive wells, plug wells, spills, and other conditions that may affect bonding requirements. We heard some industry concerns about reporting and made changes related to what we expect from a lessee reporting on another operator's activities on a given lease. That was something that they were looking for. And on this, there's a 90-day phase-in schedule for leases subject to heightened financial assurance requirements. It would be December 1 of this year for lessees that have more than 50 leases, and May 1st of 2027 for all other leases. This is still subject to change. We had a hearing on this at the land office that, again, I was not part of, but things could change still moving forward. We often get a question about, is there double bonding between the land office and the OCD? And currently, no, because we can't access the bonds that the OCD holds. That would require changes in the law. If that were to happen, we have in our rule, the land office could offer downward adjustment of financial assurances, bonding amounts and requirements, should that happen. And finally, I should note, I hope the land office process goes smoothly, but if the rule were held up by litigation, we could simply go back to our old existing rule, which says that the commissioner shall set a good and sufficient bond, and we could just, raise bonds as per the needs out there. I think this rule addresses these matters more comprehensively, and it would be a good next step for the land office.
Assume we're speaking to those out there who are operators and investors familiar in the Permian. From your perspective, what's a misconception that you think they may have, these operators and investors, about how regulators like yourself and your organization think about bonding and environmental compliance?
Sure. So, yeah, I would just ask companies to put themselves in our shoes, and I already talked about how uh, we're an entity that manages the lands of our beneficiaries. This money that we earn goes into a permanent fund, and every dollar is designated for a different beneficiary. So it could be about 8% our state trust lands are actually held, not by the state at large, but by K through 12 public education. Okay. Other tracks are dedicated to state colleges and universities, hospitals, um, New Mexico Military Institute, School for the Deaf, School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. So we manage those lands as their fiduciaries, and we've come to think of them as our own land. I mean, this is what we do at the land office. We manage the land for school kids essentially, and when you're a fiduciary, it's like, I think some of us have had parents or grandparents that needed help, managing their finances and investments and medical issues. And sometimes you get a power of attorney, you manage these things for them, for their well-being. And that's what we do. And we take it that seriously. There was a group called Center for Advanced Research, CAR, that did a study in 2021 that found that the bonding gap on state trust land and private lands in New Mexico was about, back then, I believe, $8 billion. And after inflation today, it's probably $12 billion. We have less than a couple $100 million in bonds. So you're talking about, a factor of, 50x, 100x. We wouldn't allow somebody to have $10 million of liabilities on our own property outside our house, say, and give us a bond for $100,000 to insure it, right? Or even 5 million or something like that. So, if the liabilities were that high, $100,000 wouldn't be enough. So think about things. I would suggest from that viewpoint, understand that that's our perspective at the land office.
To that same vein, we're talking about understanding each other's perspective, having dialogue around where each other is coming from. If you could change one thing about how industry and regulators engage on these issues, what would you change? How would you wave your magic wand?
Sure. I might add to what I was saying previously too, that sometimes we get a criticism that we're seeking to drive the industry out of the state or something like that. And I don't think most people think that that's a serious charge, but because we have to look out for our beneficiary institutions, the school kids, we need to make money for them, and then the way we make the most money is from oil and gas. And so, no one's seeking to run the industry out of New Mexico by any means. We just want to have a little more balance, and on engagement, I would say just precisely that: be engaged, present alternatives. We come up with new rules and policies that are much better when all sides weigh in. In the current OCC rulemaking on bonding, industry caught that the proposed rule could or would cause some wells to be bonded twice under certain circumstances. And it could be at I think a serious level. I don't believe that was intended by the proponents or the applicants. So what we're working on right now, in fact, a couple days we'll be at the OCC and working to create a fix to that language. We'll also likely create a variance so that new wells that are awaiting gas takeaway infrastructure are not considered low producing wells and have to get a $150,000 bond. I think that's a win-win because a new well shouldn't need to be bonded. Should be ready to produce and make a lot of money. Shouldn't be a threat to anybody as an orphan or anything like that. But we also want to make sure that that well is hooked up to natural gas infrastructure so that gas can be taken to market, not vented or flared, and it can be sold, creating more revenue for all of us. Final example, after we finished the methane waste rule about 4 or 5 years ago in New Mexico, where we said companies can only lose 2% of their methane through leaks or A or flaring, things like that. We had to figure out how to do required reporting. And the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association worked with companies and agencies to create a standard Excel spreadsheet and a report that worked for all parties. That was great for the agencies, and it was great for companies. We didn't have to spend time creating our own forms and showing people how to use them and making sure they work for the companies. Nice way to get something done quickly and something that could be done and used easily. So I think, again, just engaging and talking really helps when we're involved in rulemaking, policy setting.
So, last question for today. You've attended the dialogues before. You'll be there again this September in Austin. What are you most looking forward to?
Sure. I think once again, it would be the frank and honest conversations with leaders from industry. There were CEOs and vice presidents there. I met people from service companies, environmental service providers, environmental organizations. So the just frank and honest conversations were great. Getting a better understanding of where the industry is heading, particularly in these times, which are volatile. And it was great to hear, particularly what Texas is doing. We share the Permian Basin, and I always enjoy catching up with our counterparts from the Railroad Commission and those sorts of entities. And I go to a couple of conferences a year, and they have to be a good investment of my time. And the Permian Energy Dialogues certainly were, and I look forward to being there in September.
Great. Well, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this interview. We look forward to seeing you in Austin in September. And thanks everybody for tuning in.